All right. Welcome back to the Money Bear podcast. Today I have my friend on Shang from Save My Sense. And this is actually our first time meeting video to video. Like we've been messaging for a couple of years. So
Internet friends.
yes, I'm so pumped to like actually talk to you and hear your story from you and ask questions. So before we dive into your story, tell the folks who you are, where they can find you. Give us your little elevator speech.
Okay, let the elevator ding go up. All right, this is Shang, Save My Sense. I am a millionaire. I taught myself how to save and invest, and I lived super frugally for many years to do so. And today, I teach Americans primarily on Instagram at Save My Sense to save and invest your way to a dignified and joyful retirement.
Yes, I love that. And she retired very young. You retired in your early 30s, correct?
I became work optional in my early 30s, but currently I still work. My husband still works because I developed a health issue in the last few months that made me realize my health is quite important. So still would like to get some good health care out of it.
Oh, understandable. It's a shame that healthcare is tied to our jobs in this country, like especially good healthcare. But still, the option of being able to retire at a super early age, I think that's so impressive. And I think it's something that so many people want to do, but feel like it's impossible. And so I'm pumped to be like, look, it's possible. And look at these folks who did it. So, and you just you made a cross country move, right? From New York all the way to Southern California. How's that been?
Yeah, we moved in fall of 2022 from the heart of New York City, left our home there, came to Southern California, Huntington Beach. If anybody is local and wants to hit me up, my in-laws live here. So it makes life a lot easier when you have two kids. We moved while I was pregnant with the second, so that was quite the adventure.
Yeah, it's got to be so nice though to have family close by if you didn't have that out in New York.
Yes, New York was very isolating to be a mom of young children.
Yeah, I can only imagine. And then you get sunshine too, which is a nice added perk.
Well, we're trying to get more of it. We're like experiencing historic rains, which I'm afraid I must have brought from New York. So I apologize on behalf of all migrants from New York City.
Oh my gosh, that's how I felt when I went out to San Diego in January. I was bringing my mom because I wanted to show her San Diego. She had never been before. And I was like, it's great. It's sunny all the time, the best weather. And like, I love it so much. And then we show up, rain the entire time. And I was like, I swear this isn't normal. Like, this is unusual. So I feel that. So when I think about your page, I definitely associate you with a lot of frugality, a lot of like money mindfulness, but I also think about your parents a lot because I've seen so many posts specifically about your parents and the hard work that they put in order to be able to get you into Harvard and to do those things. So I kind of want to take it back to childhood, as we do on the Money Bear, and ask you a little bit about like what was money like growing up, kind of what was your parents' behaviors with money, what did they teach you about money? Let's take it back to the beginning.
Yeah, I would say growing up, I seriously was convinced that we were the poor family because we were so frugal. And my parents and I left China when I was 4 years old, and we moved to a lot of different places. We lived in Switzerland for 2 years, the Netherlands for 4 years. Some people say I still have a Dutch accent. I can't quite hear it, but apparently I do. And then we moved to the United States when I was 10 and basically stayed in northeastern United States for most of my childhood. And my parents always drove like the cheapest, tiniest little cars. Like the one we had in Europe, the front seat has to go and then you climb into the back. And sometimes I would hold on to potluck items in the trunk because my hand could reach behind the seat and grab it.
Oh my God.
In Oh my gosh, and in the United States, never ate out. My dad did all the yard work and he would grumble about the neighbors' yards being unkempt. And he's like the kind of guy that really wants yard work. And he would like go and complain and tell them he needed to do your yards. Kind of embarrassing. My mom like mended my clothes. I like never really got to shop for anything fashionable until like I hit puberty. And she made all our food. She was an amazing cook, so that made up for it, but like never ate out. Again, drove ugly cars and lived in this tiny house on the edge of a really good town for education, but we lived like in the poorest part of that town. So I was super convinced all the time we were poor, didn't have any money. So it became a huge shock for me when I applied to college and I was like, all right, let's fill out the FAFSA, let's get all this financial aid, let's go for the scholarships. My dad's like, actually, I'm paying for all of your college. I'm like, what the what? Like, with what money? What money do we have? And it turns out that while I witnessed all the frugality and all the saving part of the money. I didn't know that my dad had invested the savings and created this enormous college fund. And then as I went to college, he taught me more about how he invested and how it grew. And that gave me kind of the upper hand when it came to personal finance, to also have the courage to just go out and invest the moment that I got my very first paycheck.
Wow. I can't imagine the shock that it would be to get to like 17, 18 years old, applying to colleges and to find out you're not going to have to go into student debt. And like, especially as you said, when you felt like growing up that you were always like dirt poor, there was no possibility that you would ever have like college paid for. What a shock.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh my gosh. But a good shock, right? So during those years of frugality leading up to the big reveal that their frugality has allowed them to save so much money and be really good and build this, I think we talk about it a lot as like that quiet wealth, you know, the millionaire next door wealth.
Yeah.
Had they ever had direct conversations with you about money, or was it just more this continual sentiment that we don't have money, we don't have money, we don't have money?
They didn't say we don't have money, and I guess part of me was naive because I never asked. But what they constantly emphasized was hard work will yield fruits. And it's a very immigrant mentality. I find that very common amongst many immigrant families. And I knew that my dad like wasn't making bad money because he was a college professor. So I was like, okay, that's more than, you know, minimum wage. But again, as a kid, you have no idea what magnitude that is.
Right.
So again, it wasn't until I filled out the FAFSA or tried to fill out the FAFSA that I kind of learned a little bit more about the actual numbers. My parents always said, look, you have to gain marketable skills. They took me to the library and they said, read books about different kinds of careers and see what it's like. So my first choice was, what does a brain surgeon do? What does a heart surgeon do? And then I'm like, I don't think I can stomach that. So moved away. But they were very oriented towards, you got to get a good degree, got to get good skills, and that will make you a lot of money and make money. And that was all they wanted from me, was to be successful in the worldly sense.
And for you, when you went into college, when you went to Harvard, what did you end up studying?
I studied economics because I did it by process of elimination. I was like, I'm too queasy to do the doctor route. I don't think I am vicious enough to do the lawyer route. My dad's an engineer. I was like, no, I don't want to do what my dad does. And so I'm like, well, that leaves me with business. And Harvard on purpose does not have a business track. It is a liberal arts college, but it does have economics. That's the closest thing. And most people who do business took an economics degree. So that's what I did.
Interesting. I did not realize that Harvard did not have a business like path. What's the reason? Do you know the reason behind that?
They just emphasize that they're providing a liberal arts education. To me, that just sounds not practical.
Listen, we're not practical here, okay? So you're going to do it our way.
Yep. But they're like, look, you're going to get a great network out of Harvard anyway, but you're going to study some fancy degree. I don't know. That's how I did explain it.
Yeah. So for you, when you were growing up, was there at any point when you had access to your own money and were learning how to manage it? Or did you start like managing your own money when it came to college? Kind of like, at what point did it enter into your sphere of influence where you had choices and got to decide what to do with it?
Yeah. I mean, I had an allowance, like if I did like a whole bunch of chores and I got good grades, it had to be both. It can't just be the chore part. I would get maybe like, I think for every report card, and report cards came 4 times a year, I maybe got like $100 to $200. So it's not a lot. And like, I barely spent any of it because I was like, what do I buy with, you know, $5 a week of money? So I just saved it all. And I guess like my parents always drilled it into my head, like you just got to save as much as you can and be very frugal. And with my very first paycheck, and this was actually, I had a summer internship in college and all of that, I started just writing down my expenses because I'd seen my parents do the same thing. Almost every week, they sat down at the kitchen table with like literally this yellow notepad with a line drawn down the middle. Left-hand side, I remember, was like expenses, and then it was like the balance of, I guess, the money they were tracking. Maybe it was the bank balance or something. So it was impressed upon me early on, they were tracking something all the time. And so when I designed that, and I designed this in Microsoft Word, I just did it off of my memory of how I saw my parents do the same thing. And after college, when I got my very first fancy big broke pants job in management consulting, the first thing they teach us is how to design financial models in Microsoft Excel. And so as part of me trying to practice Excel, I designed my very own first budgeting spreadsheet that would automatically deduct the money from one of four accounts. I think I had like a savings account, a checking account, and two credit cards. So I was like, which account did I spend from? 1, 2, 3, 4. You hit the number and then it takes the money away.
Oh my gosh, I love that that was the first thing you decided. I'm gonna do this fancy budget spreadsheet and like get started on my. You were meant to be a personal finance educator, clearly.
Who knew?
Yeah, that's so cool. But I also love that you're like, you kind of learned by exposure. You saw your parents doing this thing. It doesn't sound like there were necessarily like direct conversations about it, but you're like, I know they're doing something, they're tracking something, and that makes me think I should probably do the same. So I love that. Now, when your dad came to you, when you started pulling those FAFSA forms and think that you had to do that in order to pay for college, and you saw that he had been investing the money for your college, at that point, did you understand what investing was, or was that kind of like this moment of like, teach me, what is this thing? So you said yes. So what was your experience with investing prior to that?
I was incredibly lucky that at some point in middle school, back then we had typing classes. I mean, this kind of dates how old I am. And then we had a teacher who literally teaches you how to type on a keyboard and how to get faster and faster at it.
You had the
now
game
like,
with the like kayak where you'd like type and the kayak would move
no,
forward.
we did not have that.
Oh.
No, ours were not that fancy. I mean, ours were the tiny, like beginner Apple computer, not the sleek kind, like literally the gray, ugly machines.
Yes.
Oh gosh, those were the days. So I guess she got bored and she decided to like carve out 2 weeks of her curriculum and taught all of us how to read a stock chart. Like literally, she said, I'm not going to teach you typing for 2 weeks. I lived in Boston area. Here's the Boston Globe. These are the stock pages. I'm going to teach you how to read the stock prices, and you guys are all going to pick a stock, and we're going to see how your stock performs during these 2 weeks.
That's amazing.
This was middle school. So that was my early exposure to investing. Then nothing came of it until my dad revealed that I did have a college fund, and he showed me the investing account that he used. He used Charles Schwab at the time. And back then, I think he did like a combination of a few stocks and also some mutual funds. Index funds were not super popular back then. And he would explain, he's like, yeah, I picked this because I like this part. I picked that because I like that. And then this mutual fund that does this. And because I had been exposed to stocks by pure luck, I understood it, and I was like, oh dad, these are not doing all that great like some of these. But yeah, I mean, looking back, I literally think it's just a series of very fortunate, lucky people in my life who wanted to share what they knew about finances.
What an amazing teacher to just be like, hey everyone, or I guess you wouldn't be closing those big clunky laptops. Power down your computer. Let's talk about the stock market. That's incredible. And I love that you got that exposure as early as middle school and it like stuck with you. Did you go home that night and be like, hey mom, dad, guess what I learned about? Let's open up a Roth IRA or something? It was more just kind of incubating up until that conversation with your dad.
Yeah, I mean, I never talk about school with my parents because it's never fun. And even when my dad showed me that account, and then later when I had some summer earnings, he's like, well, I can do this. Like, I can take the earnings and put it in a Roth IRA for you, and then I'll just give you the cash amount of the same thing. So you still have your summer earnings. I mean, in a way, that was kind of like a 100% match now that I think about it. But yeah, it wasn't until college when he taught me how to open my very first Roth IRA with Charles Schwab. Before then, nobody told me anything about 401ks, IRAs, or taxable brokerages. I just knew that my dad used an investment fund.
Very cool. I love though that once you did start making, like having an earning, he was like, let's open up that Roth IRA. Let's get you started. Cause we all know the second we learn about compound interest, we're like, why didn't I start when I was born? You know? Oh, very cool. Okay. So then we're in college. You are doing, it sounds like summer work. You had an internship. And at one point you started a photography business, correct? Was that during college or after?
The business officially started after college, but the skills leading up to it, I actually have been developing just for the heck of it from high school. So in high school, I wanted to join a yearbook because I was a nerdy, unpopular kid. I was like, hey, we don't get featured in a yearbook. So why don't I just take over the yearbook so that the nerds get featured in the yearbook? That was legit my reasoning for, so I eventually became one of the editor-in-chiefs. For some darn reason, the teacher chose to have 6 editors-in-chief, but it was a whole hot mess. But I was one of the 2. leading ones. And I went around campus with the camera that I found in my parents' drawers. So this was a camera that they bought in the 1980s. It was a super old film camera. The light meter, you had to really like read it. It gave you no instructions whatsoever. So you had to guess at everything. So I learned how to take photos on that super manual camera. In college, I took 2 photography classes to fulfill, I guess, some like elective requirement and learned more about film developing. And then for a Christmas gift, my parents bought me a DSLR, very fancy gift. I know that's a very fancy gift that during those times. And I started taking pictures of all of my friends at school events, including my dancer friends. I have a lot of friends who are in dance troupes in college. And then one of those girlfriends, they got engaged while still in college. And
Oh
they
my
said,
gosh, it's like
can you take
unheard
some,
of now.
yeah. They're like, can you take some engagement photos of us? I was like, I don't know what the heck they are, but let me Google that and get back to you. I love Google. And so I Googled engagement photos. I was like, okay, kind of looks like this. I'm like, yeah, sure. Let's just pick a spot and do it. Took some engagement photos. Then 2 of my friends got married straight out of college. So one of them, didn't have money for a wedding photographer. They hired like a local Craigslist photographer and they said, Shang, can you be like backup? So like I also took another set of backup photos for them. And during my first Big Girl Pants job, which is managed consulting, it's a super analytic, very left-brained type of job. And you work really long hours. And I'd always had a creative side. So I said, why don't I just pursue this photography while I have all this time? I didn't have a lot of time, but I thought I had a lot of time and began a business, and that kind of took off.
That is so cool. Do you still do photography?
It's very physical and tiring, and the most money I ever made in photography was from weddings. And around 2012, I decided to observe a Sabbath on Saturday. So I actually don't work Saturdays anymore. Most weddings happen on Saturdays. And that's around the time that I reached like the 10-year mark in my photography. Sorry, my 10-year mark was like a few years later, but that's when I began pulling back from weddings and just ramping down the business.
Okay. So at what point between, starting this business and deciding, hey, maybe, and I think we're skipping some parts, so we'll hit those parts as well. But at what point did you decide, I think I want to consider becoming work optional? I've heard about this fire thing, maybe we should do that. And then using that business to kind of help fund your way towards retirement. What was the leap between big girl job, photography company to maybe I should try to retire early?
So my first job was 2007. I officially started my business in 2008, and I'd always lived below my means, as I lived off of 30% of my day job earnings. And I never spent anything from my photography business other than reinvesting it in the company if needed. So I kept all the profits from that. At that time, the goal was like, oh, the profits I make from my photography will eventually fund my like dream wedding. Like that's kind of how I thought about the money. And then starting in 2011, 12-ish, I was in business school and I knew that I wanted to go into tech startups. And you don't make a lot of money in startups to begin with. So I was really, really trying to pare back my spending on everything and getting super frugal. In 2013, my husband and I got married. And at that time, my parents, they did pay for the wedding. So again, another privilege point that I want to acknowledge, that I had the money, it was still being invested for my photography company. My husband was the one that said, the biggest issue facing people who want to become parents is the 2-income trap mindset. He said you get used to living off of 2 incomes. The mother gives birth, and then you have this huge career crisis where you cannot figure out how to live off of 1 income or a lower income in order to afford children. So he said, why don't we avoid that issue altogether by just learning to live off of 1 income for the rest of our lives, so that we can have the optionality. So it was actually, it's funny, I call my husband Mr. Save My Sense. I said, Save My Sense happened because of Mr. Save My Sense, not because of me. I'm the spender in the relationship. I always save money, but never to that extreme level. So when we were, getting engaged and talking about money and decided on this model, that's when really I had to pull down every kind of discretionary spending possible, because I then moved to New York City, where you can spend unlimited amounts of money in New York City.
You said he was your fiance at the time, or he was your husband by the time you had this conversation?
We had the conversation while engaged. We definitely made sure to have a ton of money focused conversations before actually getting married.
And you were the one on the receiving end of what may seem like an extreme idea to somebody who has never heard of, trying to live off of one income before. So what was your initial reaction?
I liked it in practice because I was like, I like the freedom
Yeah.
aspect, the not having to worry about an impact to one's career
Mm-hmm.
by living off of very little, such that you would be kind of mentally prepared once you become a mom. Now, I had no idea what that would look like in practice. Now I do. But, this was 10 plus years ago. So I just took that leap of faith. I'm like, all right, let's try it. And
Yeah.
we were super frugal. And then later on, another friend who read a lot of blogs about personal finance, he's like, Shang, you guys remind me of Mr. Money Mustache. I'm like, who's Mr. Money Mustache? And he's like, that's the FIRE movement. Mr. Money Mustache is like one of those extreme frugal people who writes about financial independence, retire early. I read his blog. I'm like, oh my God, yeah, what we're doing. And then I started writing about our stuff online. And that's kind of how Save My Sense got founded.
That is so cool. I think it really highlights just the importance of picking the right partner, because like being able to say, I trust you in this, like I trust you with this crazy idea because I believe in the dream behind it and I'm willing to give it a try is incredible, because obviously look at where you guys are now. That's amazing. But I do think, and I don't know what your experience has been either on Instagram or hearing from folks who follow you, I think so often when it comes to couples having that conversation of like, I just had a question box up on Instagram yesterday where I was asking, what's the biggest challenge that you run into with your partner about money? And so many people are like, my partner has zero interest in learning about money and saving more money and investing in the stock market. And I feel like half of the time, and I want to know your thoughts on this, I think half of the time it's because the excited money person is coming to the table with numbers. They're coming to the table with like the plan already baked and explaining all of the things that you have to do for like a numbers perspective of like, look, we could have $1 million in X amount of years, or we could, be able to retire early in a couple of years. But they don't talk about like the dream. They don't ask, what is your dream for this? What do you want to, like, what do you see for us in the future? And like, ideally, if money wasn't an issue, how would we live our lives? What's your kind of take on that?
That's exactly it. And in fact, even before I became extremely frugal, I'd always save and invest it, right? I set aside that money from my wedding photography thinking it would fund my dream wedding. Even before then, I invested and lived off of less because I did the compound calculator. I was like, oh, I can have a
Mm-hmm.
lot of money. For me, it wasn't freedom at the time. I was just like, no, I just want to be filthy rich. Like in my
Right.
20s,
Fair
I just want to
enough.
be filthy rich. And so that was how I described it to myself. Like, girl, if you invest a lot when you're early, you'll be a millionaire. That was
Mm.
dream. And my husband just crystallized and made the idea a little bit more real by saying freedom as a parent. And I try to paint that for a lot of the people that I coach as well. I was like, think about dignified retirement. Think about if money were not an object, what would you actually really like to do? I mean, there's
Yeah.
people who want to volunteer, people who want to travel, people who want to spend more time with their ailing parents. I mean, these are all really great things to pursue where financial freedom is the enabler. It's not the end,
Mm-hmm.
it's just the means to the end that you actually want to achieve.
Exactly. It's like anything you want to do, anything you can dream of, it's going to require money. Like in
Exactly.
any sense of the word, it's going to require it. And so it's like you've got to really kind of, I think a lot of us have this like lock on what would life look like if money weren't an issue. Like we haven't allowed ourselves to even dream of that because like, well, money is an issue, money is always going to be a requirement. But it's like once you kind of work at removing those mental blocks, it's like, wow, just imagine your ultimate dream life. It takes a moment to be like, I don't even know.
Yeah, it
But
really, that's why so many of us kind of just say, fine, let's just make sure that my job is my
right,
dream. And
right,
let's make sure
that's
that
so
I get,
true.
like, I do my passion at my job. And we put so much self identity in job. When at the end, I'm like, it's a job. You're getting
Right.
paid. If you weren't getting paid, you wouldn't be doing this.
Yep. Yep, exactly. And there's so much guilt associated with it when you think like you're supposed to love what you do and then you're like, I don't, so I failed, And so it's like, no, you're supposed to get a paycheck so you can live the rest of your life exactly how you want.
Exactly.
Oh man, I love that. So now you have mentioned a few times that you're like, okay, then we entered into this mode of super frugality. What did that look like for you too? Like, what was super frugality? What were some of the things that you did? Is there anything that you would say was a little too frugal? Tell us a little bit about that part of your journey.
Yeah. I would say if I didn't have fun during that time, then I probably would have given up really
Mm,
early on. And in the beginning, yes, I also approached it very numbers driven because I'm also a numbers person, not as numbers heavy as my husband, but very analytic compared to the most. And I said, okay, in order for us to reach living off of a single income, we would have to spend this much. The biggest thing we did was get a rent stabilized apartment, not rent control. Rent control goes to people whose incomes qualify them for that. But in New York, there's a lot of below market rates rent stabilized apartments. You kind of have to just find them out from another friend, which we did.
mm.
They're not in great shape. So if anyone's seen the movie, it's not a popular movie. It's called Tick Tick Boom. It stars
Oh yeah.
Andrew Garfield. Okay,
Mhm.
and that's about the guy who wrote the musical Rent. And even before then, Tick Tick Boom, which was the music he wrote before that, there's a song about like the apartment that they live in. It's a walk up. They have to haul laundry down the street. I'm like, that's me. That was me in New York. So I think I just described to you the life of that starter apartment in New York. We're on the third floor of a walk up. It's actually 4 floors because you have to walk up an extra flight of stairs, creaky stairs. The
Mhm.
apartment is 420 square feet, 1 bedroom. The fridge is a smaller size fridge. It's actually like not as tall as I am. We had a sink and a 2 burner stove next to it. Then to dry my dishes, I had to let the stove cool down, put a drying rack over the stove with a kind of flow, a catcher thing for the a dish on the bottom, and that it takes all the water, drains it into the sink. There we go. And then no dishwasher, a small oven, a bathroom that constantly clogged up,
Oh
and
my gosh.
we raised our bed to create more storage underneath the bed. We
Smart.
picked futons that had storage space underneath it, just crammed everything underneath. Every piece of furniture had to have something else crammed underneath it.
Mm-hmm.
And the closets are super tiny. To do our laundry, we didn't have laundry in unit nor in the building. And so you walk down the street to the local laundromat, which allowed for coin operated coins. You had to have coins on Sundays and Wednesdays only. So we did Sundays. We exchanged for coins with
Two
the laundromat.
options. Only Sunday or only Wednesday. Oh my
Otherwise, you
gosh.
had to pay the laundromat to do it, and that was $1 a pound, which was too expensive according to us. We took only public transportation, which in New York is super super easy. But I remember like even if like a friend like lived a little bit far off the grid or we wanted to go to a place that wasn't on the grid, we walked. Like sometimes we walked up to 20 minutes. And the only time we ever took Ubers was like I got a stomach pain and I was like, I really
Mm.
can't do this anymore. We finally took an Uber. We traveled exclusively on points and miles. It's called travel hacking. You take credit card and loyalty points and you put it towards travel. For food, this is not food advice. We skip breakfast. I don't recommend it, but we skip breakfast. Now, Wall Street Journal, I think, wrote a really insensitive article about that.
Yes,
So
they did.
this is not my advice. This is just what we
I
did.
know, yeah.
Um, and yeah, we had a pretty like rice and beans lifestyle. Like it's very protein heavy. Like I would say it was very good. It was very whole and healthy because I cooked everything, but no, nothing fancy, no
Mm.
fancy food. We ate out once a weekend. And sometimes when our friends invited us out, we had to turn it down because I knew it was going to push us over in the food budget. And so I would
Right.
try to do another activity with a friend. And none of this could have happened if I didn't find joy in
Mm.
the process. Like if I
Right.
constantly focused on, oh my gosh, I'm missing out on the fancy lives that my friends are leading. Like my friends are all making 6 figures, just like we did. We came out of business school, we make good money, and they were enjoying it, and we weren't. I'm like, oh, if I compared this to them constantly, yeah, I would be very miserable. And so I really, really dug into what is it that you actually think you're missing out on. I was like, what is it? Why do you think you need to eat out? Why do you think that you need to like have pretty clothes? And I realized there was a lot of deep seated issues that I wanted to, for eating out, I wanted to feel less lonely. So I mistook eating out as being social. I was like, but Shaw, you can be social in so many other ways. And in New York, yes, you can hang out for breakfast. You can go for a walk in Central Park, networking events, phone calls, and all that. And then for feeling successful, I was like, yeah, I thought that by being in New York City and working a high paying job, I should be wearing like brand labeled
Mm.
clothing and carrying like a designer handbag and be in heels. And I thought, but what actually makes you successful? Like doing a good job. Does that have anything to do with what you look like? No, you just got to look presentable. And so from that, I was like, okay, I can shop thrift. I bought used. I went on buy nothing groups. I even had like clothing swaps with other friends. I sold other people's unwanted clothing to make money. I had a capsule wardrobe, all of that. Again, this process isn't overnight. This took me at least a year to figure out. But once I figured out this, what I now call the spending cycle, and how to break it, I was like, oh my gosh, you can lead a very joyful life without spending a lot once you realize you've been because I've been misplacing my values on spending. And once I removed that and looked for the values I really wanted to pursue, then my life felt aligned and it was happy.
That's so cool that you were able to kind of unveil that for yourself. I think a lot of people would like just stop at the like, no, this is miserable and I'm not enjoying it. And then they would scrap the plan. But the fact that you were able to like dig deep and be like, okay, where's this coming from? Like, what do I need? What is the need behind this desire so that I can get that need met? And like, maybe the answer is doing the thing that you're missing out on, but maybe the answer is something else like you discovered. I love too your examples of like, you know, I'm lonely, I want to spend more time with friends. And it's like, there are so many ways to socialize for free or for an inexpensive, you know, activity, especially when you live in a big city, you know, especially when you've got all like this beautiful city around you. So I think a lot of us, when we get into the financial journey and we're trying to hit those new goals and we're, you know, we still have our social circle that's used to our previous spending behaviors, it can be really scary saying no to things. But I do really think that the answer lies in saying no, but I still want to spend time with you. Can we do this instead? And like being honest, say I'm trying to meet some financial goals right now. So I'm trying not to, you know, spend money on certain things. How long did you guys do that for?
I would say the really intense years were 4 to 5 years. Like it kind of already started with me in business school, trying to go down so I could live on a startup income. But yeah, I would say the most intense years, it was 5 years. And then by age 31, we done the calculations. We're like, yeah, we could be work optional and like, you know, live simply in most parts of the United States, not New York at that time, but most parts. And then because we've just been that accustomed to being frugal, we just continue to have it for a few more years. And I would say our spending didn't meaningfully jump until we had children. And that's because childcare is our biggest expense these days.
Right. I think the whole point of finding joy in the process is so key, because if you're miserable, like you said, you're not going to be able to stick to it long term. And I love that you mentioned, you're like, we still ate out once a week. We still found ways to travel. We still were able to do the things that we really liked enjoying, you know, just in a different way or just in a way that didn't cost us as much now. So, but I also think you said 5 years of really intense frugality that can set you up for the rest of your freaking life. That's the cool thing, is like just some really intense focus for a short period of time can completely change your life. And now you guys are at this point where you do have work optional, even though you've decided like right now that's not the right thing for you. But that's got to be a pretty good feeling.
It's amazing. It's actually a freedom that I actually didn't know what to do with for a really long time, because I've been so used to being on the treadmill of just keep working, make good money. That comes from my parents' upbringing me. I was like, oh, well, I can keep going. I can keep going. So I kept working 60, 70-hour weeks. I kept neglecting my health and went through IVF and I went through my first pregnancy. And it wasn't until I hit postpartum depression when I was like, hold on, girl, like you do have a body to take care of too. And you can do it. Like you have the finances to do it now. Like don't make your career your number one thing. And it wasn't really until 2020, COVID, my postpartum depression, my first kid, all of that, when I finally sat down, I was like, why are you not acting on the freedom that your sacrifices had bought? And I was like, I don't know. I guess I just never took it. I've been so focused on the saving and investing part and the achievement part. I didn't focus on the, well, what now part.
Yeah. Oh, I think that's so valid. I mean, especially when you're just like cranking it out and you're so focused for so long. And to achieve that point, I think it's like, it's hard to believe like that's true. You can see the numbers and be like, yeah, no, I really am at this point where I could stop working if I wanted to. And then to believe it, it's a whole other thing. And then of course, like when you've been socialized or you've grown up to think like my value as a human being is like success, it's achieving, it's doing these things. It can be really scary to be like, oh, I can also take a step back. I struggle with that a lot. It still do.
It's human. It is really so human.
Yeah, I mean, especially, like you said earlier, we really do have a tendency, especially in the United States, to wrap our identity in with what we do. And so
Mm-hmm.
sometimes we just got to add a comma, though, to what we do. It's like, yeah, I am this boss bitch who's working in the 9 to 5, but I also am somebody who can take a break. It's not an easy balance. So now that you guys have reached this new level, you've moved out to LA, you've got sunshine, you've got this work optional under your belt. How are you guys kind of approaching your money now? It sounds like you're not being nearly as frugal. It's just kind of now you're naturally frugal. But has anything really changed?
Yeah, I would say this year I intentionally sat down and said, what are 3 areas that you want to focus on that you had not been doing for the last, 15 year worth of working years? Number one for me was connection. So I
Mm,
tried to, really parse out a lot of time to connect each night with my husband, but also call my friends, be there for my friends as much as I can in a remote environment. And to do that, I also step back from the crazy world of management consulting. I went to a corporate job that's more or less 40 hours a week, so that gives me the time
nice.
back. The
Mm-hmm.
second is obviously health. I reviewed to my audience that I landed in the ICU right after giving birth to my second child. They discovered a chronic issue. I'm working through that right now. I'm going to the gym a lot more. So I was like, you got to go to the gym, you got to work
Yeah.
out. So that's a big focus. And then the
Mm-hmm.
third one I would say is, yeah, like having a little bit more fun with our money. Our 10-year wedding anniversary is coming up this year. Super excited. So we
Yay,
decided to,
congratulations.
thank you. So we're celebrating with a big trip. We're doing Fiji, New Zealand, and then we're like, let's add Tahiti for 2 nights to the mix. Why
Heck
not?
yes. That's
Yeah.
amazing.
And being more generous, giving a lot more to friends, but also generous to ourselves, more date nights. With kids, yeah, sometimes I grab a burger for dinner for everyone because I just don't have the energy to make food sometimes. And just like small things that make life a little easier. Like I'm currently going to hire, even though my 2 kids are in daycare and preschool when I work full time, I also decided I would add a morning babysitter to the mix to help with getting them out the door, just because that part I haven't quite figured out as a mom of two.
Mhm.
All that stuff is like, wow, yeah, you can afford it. Like, go and spend that money. It's worth it at this point. So,
Amazing. I love to hear that. It's stuff that obviously we have different life circumstances, but it's stuff I struggle with too, where it's like a reminder of you are worth this. Like you can do this. You have the money. It's okay to invest it in a different way and to realize like it doesn't always have to be investing in the stock market. It doesn't always have to be putting that money into your savings. So, very cool. All right. I have a couple more questions for you. The final one on this realm is what are some, let's say, 3 tips that you would give somebody who is also interested in pursuing like achieving work optional status? They're at the beginning, they're like, oh man, that sounds really cool, but I don't think that's possible for me. What are some of the first steps that you would say to somebody or biggest tips?
yeah. Well, number one is try to follow the content of people who've made it possible because like until you actually see it in practice, you're like, nah, it's just numbers, this
Mm-hmm.
4% rule, how does it actually work? For me at that time, my kind of role models were Mr. Money Mustache because he really like showed how do you withdraw from an IRA or taxable brokerage and still stay under the not taxable bracket. Another one that I really like, he went back to work. Financial Samurai is another one. Like also had really great blog posts on this stuff. And Go Go Curry. Go Go Curry, or was it Go Go Curry Cracker? Another blog. These are all bloggers. They're not on Instagram, but
Yeah.
they all did like actual like were early retirement.
You're pulling
So
out the
so
OGs. Like these are
oh,
some
yeah,
OG fire
yeah. You
bloggers.
find the inspirations, right, and like see what they're doing.
Mhm.
Then I think it's really, yeah. When my husband said, imagine not worrying about money when you become a parent. Like, what does that freedom look like to you? Define that. Really, like, speak into existence what you physically want to be doing during work optionality. Is it you want to go to a less stressful job or you want to travel the world? Do you want to be with a loved one? Do you want to find love? That
Mhm.
might be the end goal for some people. Then I think the last tip that really mattered for me that I don't see talked about enough on social media is address your mental health. Invest in that. Get therapy, get your childhood issues worked out, get a recent trauma worked out, like
Mhm.
grief, divorce. are the top two drivers of massive trauma that can then lead to uncontrollable spending. So mental health therapy is worth it. If you can't get into therapy, because I know tons of therapists are booked up, at least one of those like apps that get you some support, better than nothing. And I know some PCPs can also prescribe medication, not all of them, but some of them can. And that really was, I think, those three big drivers: the following example, making the dream real, and addressing my mental health, did more than any spreadsheet could do to ignite my fire.
I love that. I love that. I agree with you 1000%. I mean, we all know money and mental health, money and mental mindset, money and our brains go so hand in hand, and it's such a behavioral thing. And it's like, if you haven't been able to get a handle on the mental health or have been ignoring it, it's going to be really hard to tackle the finance side of things. I certainly couldn't get my money right until I like handled my mental health first. And then that like opened up the world where it was like, okay, now I guess I can tackle this annoying money thing. Oh, awesome. All right. Now I have two fun questions for you, but before we get to the fun questions, tell everybody again, where can they find you? Shout yourself out.
Yeah, Shang, I'm at save my cents, being the pennies that we spend, because one time somebody thought that I was trying to save them cents, the smell. I was like, no, that's not it. Save my cents at Instagram and also savemycents.com. Give me a holler, send me a DM. I do reply to as many as I can.
Yes. Awesome. All right. My fun questions is, first, is there anything that you are binging right now? And that can be a YouTube series, a podcast, a book series. I had Jeremy on and he said he was binging chess, of all things.
Sadly, my favorite show, I think, got canceled. They kind of left it ambiguous, but I love the medical drama, The Resident. That made me happy. But in the meantime, every year, my husband and I try to watch Drive to Survive, which is a Netflix series that documents the F1 drivers. It's really cool. If you love fast cars, if you love competitive people, that's your show.
Okay, very cool. And then my other question is, what is your very first money memory? What's the earliest memory that has to do with money that you can remember?
I think it had to be the piggy bank that I used to store my allowance in. It was probably given to me in 5th grade. I found it at my parents' house. I think they threw it out now, but I took a picture of it. It looks like a green crayon, and then there's a slot at the top to put the money in. I turned it over, and I probably need to send this picture to you if I can find it. It said, saving your cents. And by this point, I found the Save My Cents, so I was like, holy shit, my company name was back then. It was like from my 5th grade.
You're like, I thought this was original, but I stole it from my piggy bank. Oh my gosh, that's so funny.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
See, again, it was like all these things along. I feel like in your story, there's just all these moments where it's like life directed you to this moment. We feel that way a lot, is like everything led us to here, but it's like you were slowly being nudged in the direction of being a personal finance, educator and creating content online. So look at you now.
I know. I'm like, 5th grade me knew what I was going to do, but
deep
took me a
down.
while.
That's adorable. I love that. You're going to have to find a photo of it and like post it and tell the story too, because that's so cool. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on today. It was an absolute pleasure to finally get to meet you, have a conversation with you, and I just love hearing your story.
Thank you, Chloe.
Thank you so much for listening to the Money Bear podcast. If you've made it this far, do us a favor, take 2 seconds, rate, review, and subscribe. It seriously means the world to me. And if you just take a sec to do that, I will appreciate you endlessly. And if you do, let me know on Instagram and I'll thank you personally. So got that. And of course, since we were talking about anything financial on this show, please note that nothing on this show is intended as financial advice. I don't know you, unfortunately, and because of that, I cannot tell you what to do with your money. You got to work with a financial professional who knows your situation, who is preferably a fiduciary, and keep in mind that everything that we talk about on this podcast is for education and entertainment purposes only. It's all my opinion. So there's that. If you want to see our full terms and conditions, head on over to the show notes. And while you're there, we've got free resources for you to get started on your money journey down in the show notes as well, including a free guide to help you with your budgeting templates and budgeting tutorials and investing 101, understanding the different accounts that are out there. All that good stuff is inside of my free guide, which is also available at thelazyinvestorscourse.com/guide. And if you're ready to take our relationship to the next level, also, I've got a free investing class that is available at thelazyinvestorscourse.com/webinar. We host it once a month. If you're ready to take our relationship to the next level, I am also hosting a monthly investing class. And that investing class, you can find the times we're offering it this month at thelazyinvestorscourse.com/webinar. That link is in the show notes as well. And that's where you have the chance to meet me live and ask those money questions live. It's a good time. We've had over 20,000 people as of recording this join or register. And yeah, it's always nice to meet you guys. So I hope to see you there. Again, all that is available down in the show notes. So thank you again for coming and listening. I appreciate you, and I'll see you next week.